Live, Soldier Field, Chicago, a frigid 26 degrees. Dan versus Sean. Only one can emerge alive. It's the morning meeting death match. Welcome in, everybody. Thank you for peace, love, and understanding, the presumption of grace, and your participation in our daily ritual, really weekday ritual, of running through the Daybook and then talking about it. And we'd love your participation. If you're here on the two-way platform, you'd like to be part of the conversation, please raise your hand. As we saw yesterday with Laura Kern, everybody can participate. Interesting fact I learned. Dan, what's the greatest single obstacle of Laura ever being president of the United States?
I'm going to guess maybe was not born in the United States.
Sean?
She's too common sense for the Democratic Party to get through a primary.
All right. Dan gets it right. She's from Canada.
Ooh.
Well, hold on.
maybe
All right. Yeah, give it some time. She may be eligible.
If we take it over, she's got this.
Yeah. You have to battle Wayne Gretzky, but she'll be eligible.
What's her name? Former governor of Michigan, Jennifer Granholm, also born in Canada. So again, the 51st state thing becomes more top of mind here. So
maybe 52nd after Greenland. So
yeah, let's wait on that. Thank you again for joining. We'll run through everything. Here we go. The president gets his intelligence briefing at 11 o'clock. I'll point out if Joe Biden was getting his intelligence briefing at 11 o'clock, we'd all say Sleepy Joe. But for whatever reason, Donald Trump is not being briefed till 11. Let's hope the Chi-Coms don't try to invade Canada before 11. 1 o'clock, big event. We'll discuss it. Caroline Leavitt hosts her first briefing from this podium. Some are already speculating that perhaps the president himself will show up. Let's not be surprised. We'll see. J.D. Vance is in Florida, 12:30 Eastern Time, speaking to the second day of the House Republican Conference retreat or offsite. And they had a press conference at 8 o'clock, the leadership. I've not heard anything about it yet, but we may bring you some highlights shortly of that, or at least tell you what they said. And then they're in session all day in various breakout groups. Hopefully there's bowls of M&Ms so no one falls asleep. But their big topic is try to figure out what to do about all the budget issues and reconciliation and debt ceiling and everything else. They hope to emerge from this today and tomorrow with a plan to move aggressively as the speaker wants them to do. Noon, Sean Duffy, reality host, reality TV star, former Wisconsin congressman. Senate votes at noon on his confirmation to be Secretary of Transportation. This comes in the wake, as they say in journalism, of yesterday's vote on Scott Bessent, confirmed to be Treasury Secretary, with no fewer than 16 Democrats voting in the affirmative. I read down the list. It was very confusing. If you want to run for president, you voted no. That was one pattern I saw for the most part. But otherwise, it's kind of a little bit of a checkerboard there.
Can I make a quick comment on that, though? At some point, nobody objected to his credentials. And I think that's one thing that there are several members on the Republican side that have always said, and I agree with this. At some point, you win an election, you get to choose people unless they are fundamentally have an issue. Yeah. And I think there's no question that Scott Bessent is qualified in every respect. He's not, and he's not. So I
agree with you. And I mean, I'd like to go interview all the people who voted yes on Rubio and no on Bessent and get them to explain what the difference is, except that Rubio is a senator. But yeah, I agree with you. I don't know what their objection. I mean, obviously part of their objection is their current frame is class warfare, and so they don't want to vote for a millionaire or billionaire, whichever he is.
Well, don't forget too, he was a prominent hedge fund manager, and he's going to advocate, and I think that's for some of them will try to say, that's not who should run the U.S. Treasury Department.
Yeah, right.
I don't know. I don't agree with it. But
12:30. When the Senate's in session on Tuesdays, both parties have their lunches. So, Sean, explain to people who don't know what's the dynamic of those lunches as compared to the norm.
So it's interesting. I've been to both. The House sort of conference gatherings are in the morning. They get donuts, and I'm not kidding. As the former conference communications director, for a while, the greatest issue that I had to deal with was whether or not there were more frosted donuts than chocolate, which I was very intrigued by. The Senate lunches are much more collegial. They're smaller. They feel much more free to discuss things in an open setting and frank discussion. So this is when they hash things out. But I think that the Senate ones are a lot freer of exchange of ideas. The House is much more, we tell you what's going on, you get up and yell at us.
Yeah. Dan, have you been to your Senate lunch?
I have, and I've been to the House one too. Yeah, I mean, the House one is a microphone in the front of the room and you go up and, you know, speak when spoken to. The Senate is more, they're in the Mansfield room, you're around, well, depends what majority or minority, but you're around, and to Sean's point, it is much more open, much more back and forth, but sometimes they kick staff out. It's members only.
Yeah, but they are, in my experience, and just to be clear, I've never been, but I know a lot about them from talking to folks. They are kind of like the closest thing to like a real working lunch where
Absolutely.
people say real stuff to each other.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Sometimes punches are pulled, but it is a place where stuff happens. And obviously, super curious to know. I think today's Republican lunch pretty predictable, and you know, for the most part. Although curious to know what they talk about in terms of Bobby Kennedy and Tulsi Gabbard. But the Democratic lunch today, I think, will be pretty darn interesting. And there's almost always a stakeout afterwards. So tonight on Two-Way Tonight, hopefully we'll have some Chuck Schumer sound about that.
Mark,
3
I think that
o'clock.
our lunch is going to be a little interesting too. I've heard from some people yesterday afternoon. There are more than a few Republican senators who want to say something about some of the stuff that Trump is doing to put some markers down for the future, that they were not comfortable with it. So if a Democrat does it, they could say, see, I made that statement that I was uncomfortable with Trump.
Yep, absolutely. All right.
Well, you'll know when the leak comes out.
Exactly. 3 o'clock, Secretary Noem of DHS holds gives a video address to the staff there that will be open press. Go ahead and put up the picture. This is the secretary, just newly sworn in, over here in Gotham City. Sean, what do you think of this picture?
Well, I mean, the friend of the platform, Tricia McLaughlin, is now the
Yes.
Assistant Secretary of Public Affairs.
She
And I would
is.
just say day one, big win for Tricia. That's the shot that you want. It looks tough. She looks great. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. But this is, I mean, she was first day in New York City getting results. That's the mantra right now.
Yeah, and as you said, Tricia, you know, who's joined us regularly here, congratulations to her. She's the assistant secretary over there. But Sean, she's not been confirmed yet, has she been? She
No, the
started the job.
DHS, the law was changed. So Treasury, Defense, and DHS are non-confirmable anymore. So you're not honorable. You just get the title Assistant Secretary. In fact, little known fact, in DOD, it's not Assistant Secretary of Defense for Public Affairs. It's Assistant to the Secretary for Public Affairs. So the acronym's the same.
Matthew Bartlett says it's true of Labor and State. Why were those departments changed?
It went back. So after Bush, in the middle of after Bush 43, it was just stupid. Ledge Affairs, that and I'm blanking. There's one other one of the assistant secretaries that were like, we're bogging down these guys in the process for no reason because it's.
I don't see why you get to be assistant secretary if you're not confirmed. But congratulations, Trish.
Well, there's a lot of
Dan?
assistant secretaries that aren't confirmed.
Yeah, you know
they're
what I'm
careers.
watching though, with that, to go back to the ICE raids, that is New York City. That is, I believe they're in the Bronx. That is Richie Torres district. He's been pretty vocal in support. What do Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, Mayor Adams, Hochul, DSCC chair, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, what do they say today? Because the headlines are they've gotten some pretty bad people.
Yeah.
So do they cheerlead it? Do they look are they silent?
It's a great question. You see lots of people out, the border czar and other officials out there, very visible. Lots of cooperation with the press, lots of photo ops, lots of local news coverage. They're not hiding from this at all.
So the thing that's interesting to Dan's point is after the first week of the Bush administration, Terry McAuliffe called me and said, Sean, or did I bumped into him or he called, whatever. And he says, hey, I got a bunch of guys at Dulles. They're getting screwed on this travel ban thing. They're good people. Like, we got to fix this. You got to, can we work this out? And it was sloppy. I mean, just to be honest. And people are getting caught in the net that didn't. And this gets back to Dan's point. This time it's surgical. We're going in, we're rolling up bad dudes, and we're going to get rid of them. And here's, by the way, we're going to enumerate the crimes that they've committed. So do you want to be on that side, or do you want to, I mean, and this is where these guys have done such a better job of planning and executing.
But the challenge is the party is split. Like, they are fighting in lunches. Like, I bet that Senate lunch today, my sense is the caucus has gone from shock and awe about what's happening to anger. And I think today in New York now, there's going to be like Chuck, because apparently last Friday they were like, what are we saying on immigration? And Schumer had no answer. And now it's in your backyard.
Yep.
Yeah, but Dan,
It's
don't
gonna
you
be-
think there's a big difference between saying Donald Trump is rolling up all of these people who and separating families versus Donald Trump's rolling up criminals who threaten our people? I mean, he's put Democrats in a very bad position because I don't know, no matter if you're Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, do you really want to be defending people who assaulted Americans, who committed a violent crime? I mean,
but that's the point, Sean. I think what people want, let's say it. Let's come out and say we support rounding up criminals.
Oh, right. And that's
right now there's just utter silence, and they're looking to the leadership to say, how is a caucus? And you have elements in both the Senate and the House saying we cannot support arresting these criminals. We can't cross that line. And so the family is fighting and the train's left the station, right? And people want to know.
They're like frozen in amber from the 4 years of Biden and Harris. You know, can you name a Democrat who has denounced or expressed sympathy for the families of those killed, whose family members were killed by people in the country illegally? There are some, but not very many. Not exactly, but not very many. And so it's like they do not want to give an inch to Trump on immigration. But Dan, as you say, there's some things he's doing now that are not only extremely popular, but it's hard to believe they're not for. But they just don't want to say it.
Look at this Selena Gomez thing that happened yesterday, right? If this was 4 years ago, she would have been on the cover of People this week. Selena Gomez, she took a video down because of backlash. And I mean,
I don't know that she took it down. I think it's cycled out.
No, she took it off Instagram.
I think it was a story and it cycled out. I may be wrong. Somebody will check. But I think I know it's been reported she took it down. I believe it was a story and it cycled out.
When you say a story, okay, because I don't know that. I mean, so because I heard she took it off Instagram, but you mean that there was a story that she did, like an interview?
No, there's a thing on Instagram.
Oh, I know what it's okay. An Insta story. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Instagram correspondent.
Those stay up for a limited time. I think that's
24
what
hours.
happened. Yeah,
okay.
I think that's
I
what
know
happened.
that.
All right.
Oh, I'm
All
being
right.
told Sean is right.
Yeah.
Somebody said that. That's all I need to know.
Yeah, I'm not sure
guys,
Sean's
the
right.
show's
Anyway,
over.
all right. So lots of big announcements about suspending spending on grants, not for individual payments, but to organizations. The decision to investigate the investigators into the January 6th prosecutions. And in addition, the firing of career Justice Department officials who worked with Jack Smith. So let's be clear. There are things to say about this if you're in the media that are very important. That this be done legally, that this be done in a way that gets scrutiny and done correctly, so it's in the interest of the public. Vital. But let's also say this. The media, to some extent, is covering these things in an hysterical way, as if these aren't things Donald Trump ran on, and as if the country should just accept the status quo. The Washington bureaucracy, if you want to call it the deep state, you may, is filled with people who hate Donald Trump. And I say the word hate advisedly. They have no interest in his success. They do not like him. It's an asymmetrical situation. So if you're a Republican, and back Reagan and before, Nixon, you have said, this is unfair. The permanent bureaucracy is staffed with people who are Democrats, liberal Democrats. They do not like Republicans. They particularly don't like Donald Trump. And in the case of the prosecutors who worked with Jack Smith, again, if you believe those prosecutions were righteous, I'm sure you're outraged. But if you believe that those prosecutions were lawfare, could you imagine Joe Biden allowing people to stay in the Justice Department who tried to put him in jail? No. So here is.
Well, by the way, wait a sec. They put his son in jail. I mean, he did. He pardoned his son.
Okay, but
he
in
kept
fairness,
him in, he did.
After he tried desperately to give him a sweetheart deal and say, dude, just take the deal.
Didn't happen.
You're right, it didn't happen. But I'll say again, there's the asymmetry, which is if the department were filled with conservatives who prosecuted his son, I think he would have done something about it. These people are all a bunch of liberals. Not everyone's like a ideological liberal, but they do not like Donald Trump. So here's Ken Delanian on MSNBC this morning. He's their Justice Department reporter, explaining to the American people why it's bad that Donald Trump fired the prosecutors who worked with Jack Smith.
On that. This is a shock and awe campaign that the Trump administration is waging at the Justice Department. And this act of firing these career prosecutors who worked for Jack Smith, this is really stunning. I mean, it's hard to explain to the public because they probably think, well, of course he's doing that, right? They investigated the president and he comes in and he's firing them. It just doesn't happen. And it appears to have been illegal because these are people who have civil service protection. You can't just fire these folks. You have to have cause to fire them. There was no cause or proper cause given in that letter, no allegation that they did anything wrong or acted inappropriately or were incompetent. And so they're going to appeal these filings and they'll probably win, but it won't matter in the end because their careers essentially at the Justice Department are over. And many of these people were very accomplished career prosecutors. And it's sending a message to other people at the Justice Department, you know, get in line or your job is in peril.
T-ball star Sean Spicer. The ball is on the tee. Here's your bat.
My
Go.
colleague from New York. Look, while I concede that this is not an entirely apples to apples comparison that I'm about to make, when I was kicked off the Naval Academy board, and okay, maybe you don't like me, but Biden fired everyone, including H.R. McMaster, a graduate and former teacher at West Point, kicked him off the West Point board. The same week he was supposed to receive a Distinguished Alumni Award. The media said nothing. It was historic. It was unprecedented. We went to court and they argued to the court and affirmed that they had the right to fire anybody at any time. So President Biden set this precedent to be able to fire anybody he didn't like. And Ken Delanian, no one at NBC, no one in the media was so concerned about the precedent and the history and the actions that were taken then. So I don't really care what they have to think now. Beyond that, his now colleague Jen Psaki sat at the podium and questioned my credentials to serve on the Naval Academy board. So there's little crocodile tears for these people just doesn't pass muster anymore. They said nothing when Biden started the ball rolling down the hill. So sorry, bye-bye.
All right, Dan, before you jump in, I'll just point out, and you said it wasn't apples to apples. You were not a career civil servant. That's
but they
big
went
difference.
to court and argued in the affirmative.
I know.
The president of the United States has the right to do this. That is codified in law now because the court upheld the president's right to do that. So it was Biden that said, I have the right to do this. I'm going to fire these people. When Trump follows through and says, great, I'll take it a step further, you can't get mad at him.
Sean, what was the name of that case?
Spicer v. Biden.
Thank you.
Would you like?
Dan,
there's a T-shirt.
No further questions, Your Honor. Dan.
Yeah, I mean, if the Mets need some power at first, Sean, they just that's out of the park right there. Yes. Look, I mean, I do think that's an apples to oranges. Look, Mark, you said it. Like Trump ran on this, so to some extent, it's not unexpected. But it is not true to say the entire government is Democratic. A lot of people are, but ask Obama and Clinton. How many people leaked against the Clinton administration for 8 years? Ken Starr's team didn't leak to people. There weren't people in the Department of Justice going. Well, we have a different view of that one.
They weren't the career people, except some FBI agents.
That is not true. I mean, that is, there were career people. How many people gave Obama in the Pentagon a hard time leaking his ideas about Afghanistan? Like, it is as old as the Republic itself. Administrations have been upset.
Dan. The permanent bureaucracy in every
is mostly
department.
Democratic. I
Okay,
hear you.
but like not mostly, like 92%.
Maybe it's. I don't think it's that high, but it's high. I agree.
It's almost as liberal as Washington journalists.
Yes.
Almost.
But here's the thing. To fire inspector generals that both parties, administrations for years have argued are a pain in their side. If you want to do this, like, okay. But then I don't want to hear when the next Democratic president comes in and blows every one of these people out and says, but Sean, getting rid of someone on a naval board is very different than getting rid of.
No. But he also did it. It wasn't just, I was the only one that actually had the gumption to sue him. But the bottom line is that he did this throughout government. And I have no problem. I mean, the president has the right to have people that are going to execute. And if you're going to stand in the way of the agenda set forth by the duly elected commander in chief, then get out of the way.
Look, I hear you. He ran on it, and I also will be very clear. I think 99% of the public doesn't care whatsoever. That this is a process beltway story.
Yeah.
But you are setting precedents.
All right.
Beyond
Let's
naval
get away from
boards.
I agree.
personnel.
No, Dan, I
Let's go
don't,
to-
just so we're clear, and that's why I didn't try to equivocate that it was the same. But it's like when Harry Reid got rid of the filibuster for certain things. Once you start the ball rolling down the hill, you can't say to the next guy, "Oh no, it stops there on the hill."
I hear you.
Dan, let's get away from personnel and go to this question of the suspension of grants and payments to nonprofits and other entities. Is that suspension? It asks you about the substance of political. Will that cause damage in the United States? And if you were running the Democratic comms war room, would you be looking for individual cases of people hurt by this, or what?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there will likely be real world impact. I would also try to drive a wedge with Republicans because, again, you are setting the precedent that the next Democratic president is going to do the same thing. I mean, this is a Congress controls the purse issue. Like, Mike Johnson right now looks like a poodle. I mean, he is the wholly subsidiary lapdog of Donald Trump. So the House is kind of getting diminished a little bit right now. So now you're saying to the rest of Congress, like, it is whatever that guy or woman someday wants to do, and we're all cool with it. So I would both try to drive a wedge with Republicans, and there will invariably be real world issues where, I forget what it is with the World Health Organization right now. There's a virus that's emanating, I think it's out of Southeast Asia. If that, shows up and people are harmed and we're not a part of the process, and like, that is where I go back to grievance versus helping people. And some of this stuff is starting to look very small and petty.
But I think, and I don't disagree with you on some aspects, but I will say this, the WHO conspired with China to cover up COVID. The idea that we're funding an organization that is fundamentally not, I mean, you want to get to helping people. I don't think the WHO did us any favors during a world pandemic.
Oh, look, they were one of the first people to flag it, share it with the world. They got caught between a pissing match between Trump and Xi. They did. Like that's it. They are not sitting there saying, how do we screw Democrats or Republicans? They're not.
Sean,
they have two big funders.
Sean, on the grant issue, if you were advising Susie Wiles and Caroline Levitt, what would you warn them about of where there could be political downside to this?
Oh, I mean, we all know this, whether it's Ken Delaney or anyone at NBC, they're going to go find some women's shelter or young children's thing that helps people with, that whatever. I don't want to say something, go down a rabbit hole here, but they'll find the victims of the grant that was helping, dogs that got abused that were after us.
And so if you were at the podium and somebody said, "Hey, Caroline/Sean, what about this little girl who had to see her father, whatever?" Like, how would you answer that?
Obviously, President Trump is concerned about all Americans. We're $36 trillion in debt, several trillions in deficit spending every year. The president had a mandate from the voters this year to review government spending. We're just doing that. We're pausing it. We're not ending it. We're going to review these grants to make sure they're doing exactly what they're intended to do and to make sure that we spend money the most effective way to actually help these folks. So we're going to do a pause and a review, and we'll get back to you.
And we'll get back to you. Always a good way to end an answer like that. All right, let's talk about this AI thing in China. We kind of teed it up a little bit yesterday. Sean, President Trump played it down, talking to the pool on the way back from Air Force One, said, this is fine. This shows there's competition, whatever. Is this a substantive crisis, not just for the American companies who lost value yesterday, but for national security? Is this a crisis or not a big deal or somewhere in between?
Yeah, by the way, not just the company, some individuals also lost a little.
Yeah. Corporations are people too, Sean.
That's right. Thank you, Romney. Yeah, I think it's a huge national security issue for a multitude of reasons. One, the idea of the number of people that were downloading this app yesterday. I mean, my God, I continue to go the spy balloon, then TikTok, and now we're like, hey, let's download an AI app to put on our phones. that's coming from China. I mean, how dumb are we? That's number one. Number two, I think the costs, the infrastructure costs of this thing are what scare me, right? These guys spent what, like $6 in a Starbucks gift card and put this company together, and we're spending hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars at Qualcomm and Nvidia and all this. And to me,
what if China's lying about how
I was
much
just going to
they
say,
actually
yeah,
well,
spend?
that was actually in the back of my mind. I thought to myself, I don't know enough to know, but I assume that enough of these tech guys have beta tested this thing and kicked the tires. But I started to think to myself, why can't I just go out there and say, for $100 million, I built a thing? I guess the question is, I don't know enough. I mean, are they downloading this thing now and you can actually use it so that you can see?
Well,
Yes.
yeah, but they suspended new signups.
Right, but enough people went to the App Store yesterday to say,
over the
yeah,
last
I
couple
used
days,
it and it
yes.
worked, and I gave them all my personal information so that they can screw in the future. So it is a national security issue. It's also, in my opinion, just it really should send shockwaves through Silicon Valley and everywhere else that says, why are they able to do this for pennies on the dollar and we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars? And what does this portend going forward? Because I mean, this is the same thing that we had with Huawei, which is we start making a cheaper product, we hand it around the world, everybody uses it, and then the infrastructure is Chinese, donated, built, et cetera, and we're screwed going forward.
Dan.
Yeah, and also just, I think there's worries about, is their military more advanced now? Like, how are they, if China is not just at par with us, but potentially has leapfrogged us, it's like Sputnik, I mean, or the nuclear arms race. It's going to raise a lot of questions. It's such a new technology. In the United States, it's largely been in the private sector. The budgets that some people have allotted for the spend on this is, astronomical. And if it can be done cheaper, I think there is a real question how, and how do we not know about it? Whether it's the CIA or Meta.
Well, that's actually another point. How did we not see? How do you pop something off the App Store that no one in the Intel community knew was coming? That doesn't really show well for your human sources in China.
Well, look, it's pretty clear we have great sources in Russia. I mean, it's almost like we're sitting in the Kremlin and we seem to know what they're saying to each other at all times. It's also pretty clear the last 20 years we have terrible intelligence in China.
Yeah. It's hard to.
By the way, one of the gentlemen, Mark, in the chat,
have great intelligence here.
that Nvidia confirmed that it's authenticity of the app. So if that's true, that speaks to the.
Yeah, but they can't say how much was spent,
the thing is,
spent on it.
This gets back to another comment I made a couple days ago, Mark, which is our lawmakers largely are in the Senate and not as much in the House anymore, but are like 80-year-old people who don't know how to use an iPhone, and we're going to rely on them to decide the rules and regulation for AI.
Who was a member of Congress who said the internet was a series of tubes? Who was that?
Now, one of the great was Orrin Hatch asking Mark Zuckerberg in a hearing about, if you don't charge for your service, then how do you make money? And he tries not to laugh. And he goes, advertising.
All right, lots of stuff in the chat. People are engaged on this. We're going to talk more about it. So a couple things have dropped since we convened. First, here's Pete Hegseth's newly released official photo, Secretary of Defense, for your viewing pleasure. And there you go. Sean, one word to describe the look on his face. One word.
Badass.
Dan.
Constipated. That's not a great photo.
Yeah. All right. Now, Sean in particular has a limitless interest in the exploits of America's new superhero, aka Kristi Noem. So here's a tweet, 202 please, that just dropped of Kristi Noem, still here in New York City. You'll like this tweet, Sean, and wait till you see the video. Just now, enforcement operations in NYC. I wish he'd said Gotham City. Criminal alien with kidnapping, assault, and burglary charges is now in custody, thanks to ICE. Dirt bags like this will continue to be removed from our street.
Zammy.
And pow, Zammy, whap. Now roll 203. Sean, don't take your eyes off this. Forgot to hold the phone horizontally, but that's okay. Look at that dirt bag.
Social media.
Well, some social media, yes, some no. Look at that dirt bag. Dirt bag nabbed.
You know what's missing? Do you know what's missing?
Sound effects?
Bad boys, bad boys.
Yeah.
What you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you?
So
Does
does he retweet that by the end of the show?
He retweets that and says, "You go, girl."
That's right.
By the way,
Yeah.
I stole this idea. So, but it's such a sea change from the Biden administration that maligned these ICE agents and CBP agents. I think it was CBP who they made up that faux controversy about the horses and all that stuff at the beginning, to these guys actually being able to execute on their mission and why they joined. So I think it's exciting for these folks. I think it's great for the country to see this in action. And whether or not you talk about the still pictures or the shot that you just showed, the imagery sells so much of what's happening, and it's so critical, and they understand that. The American people are seeing a sense, like whether it's the Melania Trump photo, the Pete Hegseth photo, the B-roll that we're playing, the imagery in the last 7 days has really showed a sense of accomplishment and a sense of action.
Yes. I try to limit the number of times I give examples of liberal media double standard because A, there's so many, and B, I only like to give the ones that are so clean that I hope they make people who deny it exists think twice. Okay? Here's one. When Democratic administrations embed reporters for these ride-alongs to give them the opportunity to shoot stuff happening, it's all just heroic and great. When Republicans do it, people like Brian Stelter at CNN are like, these ride-alongs are corrupt. You know, it's like they're giving too much access. So, for instance, CNN got exclusive video of Roger Stone's house being stormed by the FBI, and I believe did somebody get exclusive video of Mar-a-Lago, the Mar-a-Lago raid?
Somebody did. I think
Somebody local in Palm
Yeah.
Beach got tipped off. Yeah.
Anyway, my point is, you either think it's okay for government to give special treatment to individual news organizations to have access to shoot great video like we just saw, or you don't think it's okay. And as someone who's in the news business and likes access, I actually don't think it's great because I also care about civil liberties. And I think it's unfair to the people who are shown in many instances. I'm not totally against it, but I have mixed feelings about it. But again, this administration is giving really great access to mostly news organizations on the right to shoot this stuff. And based on what I've heard, I expect it will continue.
Well, on the Today Show this morning, the ride along was with I think it was a Garrett Hake. No, not Garrett Hake. I apologize. But they had a ride along in Chicago that was exclusive to them.
Yeah,
and
it's not just conservative. I said mostly. There's some people have been giving them.
But also remember, JD Vance gave his first interview.
Americans. I think it's fantastic. I do.
Dan, what if they stormed your house? Would you like there to be a video camera from a news organization outside your house while they storm your house?
Of course not. And I wouldn't want that. Look, when the Securities and Exchange Commission hauls a CEO off or some hedge fund manager for insider trading.
Oh, for white collar, I'm all for it.
Well, look, as somebody who's had,
point. Like everybody,
you wouldn't, in my hypothetical, Dan, you're not being charged with a white collar crime. You're dealing opium.
Wow. It's
and not
more
just rich
prominent
people.
in our neighborhood, Mark, that the SEC shows up, and I think it's great. Like it's great.
Why do you think it's great? Why do you think it's great? Because good video?
Yeah. Look, it shows action, and if you did something wrong, I mean, hopefully you didn't do anything wrong.
No, but you think it's great. You think it's great for Trump, but do you think it's great for America?
I think Americans appreciate seeing people held accountable, and they appreciate seeing action. I do. I think
they do appreciate it, but we are. But there's also hopefully a civil.
I think there's also, in my mind, there's a big difference between going to Roger Stone's home. And going on a ride along where you're rolling up, actual criminals that are escaping justice. Roger Stone.
And usually they don't.
How do you know they're actual criminals?
They have a record. They've been convicted. These are people on the lam.
Yeah,
but Mark,
we don't know that they're the right people.
Actually, go in with a gun out. They're on the street, and when they get walked out, they're there. But they're not usually like couched down behind and like, hey, duck if they shoot.
I understand. I'm not worried about the safety of anybody. I'm worried about the violation of individual rights. In any case, we're going to go to your questions in a second. I'm going to address one thing that comes up all the time when people complain about interrupting on this show. Okay? We're very respectful of each other, and this is supposed to be a spirited and engaging conversation. So, people out to dinner and have a conversation. You talk over each other sometimes. You're spirited. We're not interrupting in some rude way. Please stop sending me emails about interrupting Sean.
By the way, I get emails that I should interrupt more.
No, I know you do. I know you do. And please feel free to do it. But the interruptions are part of the program. In fact, they're the basis of the program because they're respectful interruptions. or they're not interruptions. They're conversations.
Pardon the
All right.
interruption was already trademarked, so we couldn't call it
Exactly.
that.
Exactly.
I
All
mean,
right,
I just as long as we
everybody.
don't get to the point where oh my God, I'm trying to think. Comedy Central, Crossfire dude, Daily Show.
Jon Stewart?
Jon
As
Stewart.
long as Jon Stewart doesn't come on and lecture us as he did.
Yeah,
Ooh.
exactly. Exactly. All right. Again, please raise your hands if you want to be in the conversation. Democrats, I'll say again, I see you on here. I know you're there. Please raise your hands in equal numbers. Tell us what you think the party should be doing or what's wrong with Donald Trump. And as always, because I'm a fan of British literature, I always go to Mr. Darcy. Mr. Darcy, welcome in. Thank you for joining.
Hey,
Everybody
guys.
who doesn't know where you are, what's on your mind, please.
My name is John. I'm in Oklahoma. Wanted to ask, I would say, a kind of unexpected question. I know right now the Trump administration is focused on getting their cabinet confirmed. I just wanted to ask, when do you think they're going to start shifting to open judicial seats, like in the Circuit Court of Appeals and stuff like that? And I've heard Trump might have had a falling out with the Federalist Society. So just, you know, do you think these new Trump judges are going to be any different than term one or anything like that? Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Great question, John. Sean.
Actually, great question. I've asked this before to some of the guests on my show. When Trump came in office the first time, Obama and it again, I'll leave it to just. But the bottom line is there were a ton of vacancies, and they were able to fill those. Biden actually took advantage of a very similar scenario at the end because they hadn't passed. So, but this time there aren't as many. And so just by the nature of the last two administrations really do something. So they'll get to them as they come. But remember, you're filling vacancies. And so the question is, now I know that I think it's the Ninth Circuit. There's some hope that there's some vacancies there that they'll fill, obviously some potential Supreme Courts. But you can only fill a seat which someone is saying they're either retiring or they have retired from. It's just not going to be as much this year. And the way the Senate works, right, is there's so many hours of debate per nominee, et cetera, and they can slow walk or not. So once they get through the cabinet and then you go to the sub-cabinet level, and at that point, you'll start to batch people. It'll be like 18 assistant secretaries up for one. And, you know, then it'll start to move along. But it's just not as big of a deal. I don't think Trump has soured on the Federalist Society per se. And I think, to be blunt, the type of nominee that they put out is where Trump is going to still go no matter what. So whether it's Don McGahn or the new White House counsel putting that list together, that was probably one of Trump's greatest successes that he received a lot of acknowledgement from the right. So I think regardless of the group, and I don't necessarily concede that the Federalist Society has lost anything. It's just that Leonard Leo is not leading it in the same way that he was. He's taking on additional responsibilities. But I think that you're going to get the same kind of judge that you got the last time.
Before Dan, you respond, a little bit of news. The Democrats who already face an uphill climb to regain the majority control in 2026 have to deal with the news now that Gary Peters, who ran the DSCC last cycle, announced today he will not seek re-election. There'll be a lot of speculation about who the candidates will be on both sides. I predict Tudor Dixon might run on the Republican side. There's some House members who might run on both sides, but it's not a sure thing that the Democrats will keep that seat. So it makes their task of winning back the majority just a little bit harder. And of course,
Does Mayor Pete run for governor or potentially run for Senate now?
Yeah, he wants to be president, so I'd say governor. Dan,
But then you have to do things.
thoughts on the judiciary.
Oh,
Dan.
me, sorry. I think, look, one of the things that Trump benefited from immensely when it came to judges in the first term was that Mitch McConnell cared deeply. It was going to be part of his legacy. I don't know the same to the same extent that John Thune knew to this and juggling so many things is as laser focused as Mitch McConnell was.
Yes, you do. You know he's not. He's not.
Yes.
He's not as concerned.
He's got to work with reconciliation.
And John, just to put a slightly finer point on what Sean said, the floor time is a challenge now, and Democrats would block it. And although I'm sure they had some lists because they have lists for everything in this new administration, you still have to go through the politics of who are you going to actually pick for these things. And you can't really do that till you get to the White House. And the counsel's office is a little busy. So it'll happen. It'll start being a big thing, but it's just going to take at least a little bit. Mr. Darcy, thanks for joining. Appreciate it. Thank you for the excellent question. Hugo, come on in. Tell folks who don't know where you are what's on your mind, please.
No,
But
you're
unmute
muted.
first.
Morning, I'm calling from beautiful, sunny coastal Connecticut, Mystic Pizza Town.
Nice.
Listen, I was wondering if you guys could elaborate on what the process will be for ending the war in Ukraine.
Okay. Who
What the
wants to
what?
go
Anybody,
first?
I mean,
Ending the war. I'll tell you, to me, it's pretty clear because the dimensions have been clear for a while. Putin's going to be able to keep some land in the east, and there's going to be some finessing of what Ukraine's relationship is with the EU. Probably no finessing about what a relationship with NATO will be like, because that's a bottom line issue for Putin, but perhaps some sort of defense connection to the United States and NATO that doesn't reek of NATO membership. And how it actually gets sequenced, if Trump meets with both presidents, whether he talks to them, how it actually gets done, I think is unclear. But I think you'll see an effort by Trump to get an understanding. My guess would be first with Putin, would be my guess, and then with Zelensky. But basically to take the temperature of both sides, explain where he thinks the map is and the other conditions. And I think because Trump would want to do this, I think you'd see, if not the three of them together in a room, I bet you'd see the three of them together in the same city. That's my guess based on what I know. Dan.
I mean, it's a great question. He obviously said it would be easy, and it's not. I also think that the play in Greenland is going to complicate this a little bit, because the Russians have a very vested interest in who controls the waterways as the Arctic begins to melt here. And I think I count me as someone who's been a little fascinated by the way the Trump White House to date has treated Russia. It's different than, when the first term. And the Russians seem to be quiet. They're not taunting back. They're not engaging in too much. I'm also curious to what extent the Europeans potentially try to bridge a little bit of the gap if our spending recedes. Look, we're the Ukrainians' banker. So if we cut arms off or start to scale it back, it's hard to fight a war without munitions and soldiers. And so if the Europeans do step forward to some extent, springtime is when the fighting happens, spring and summer, and we're coming out of the winter. So if you're going to do something, you probably need to do it now. Otherwise, they'll probably fight to the fall. And when the ice and the bad weather resumes in late fall.
I would just say I agree with almost everything that Mark's saying except the logistics. I don't know that you're going to see any face-to-face where but it doesn't. I don't think that's as big of a deal. I think President Trump has already communicated both in terms of social media and verbally that he thinks a deal it can be cut, and I think he's going to do everything he can to do that along the contours of what Mark described.
and what about the Russian assets that are frozen? What can we do with with that money?
Keep it.
Nothing.
Give it to you. Give it to Ukraine. Keep it. I don't think there's any way Putin can get that back.
Pay for reconciliation a little bit.
Yeah, tax cuts.
Not tax cuts. It'd be for reconstruction in Ukraine. And Trump's friends will all get to go into Ukraine and build stuff, I believe.
Right.
All right, Hugo, thank you for the question. Very much appreciate it. Diane, where's that kid? I was going to call on you, but primarily because you had a cute kid, but cute kid is just, oh, here we go. All right, Diane's no dummy. Diane, welcome back. Remind everybody where you are and that baby's name and what's on your mind.
We're in Cedar Rapids, and this is Dominic.
Hi, Dominic.
Hey, buddy.
What's on your mind
So
today?
I guess I've been thinking a lot about the Maha movement, and it occurs to me that it's actually not so much about like getting this chemical out or that chemical out, but all these themes that they talk about of like corporate capture and the revolving door and the special interests, those are kind of the main things that are resulting in the outcomes that we have. And they're kind of what determines how policy is made. And I just kind of wonder, like, why is it that the senators and all the politicians, they have this opportunity to be freed from all that right now? Why don't they just let that happen? Because what are the lobbyists doing for them? Is it really just about like getting money for campaigns and having like nice, tickets and stuff? Or is there really a function to having the lobbyists and all these people really making policy in our government?
Diane, it's actually, I mean, as someone who was a lobbyist for years, there's two things. And Sean made a gesture to one. One is they are active with campaign contributions, but it actually is, that is not, I think, as big of a deal anymore, the way that you raise money and where it comes from. One of the bigger issues is most members of Congress come because they care about like 2 or 3 issues, right? They're motivated by immigration and tax cuts, let's say. But you have to vote on 1,000 other issues. And you don't know much about a lot of these issues. And your staffers, similarly, they're 22, 23 years old. You're passionate about, let's say water. You're from Mississippi. And you are suddenly now assigned a healthcare bill. You know nothing about the issue. So people call you when the bill comes up and says, can I come in and educate you about the issue? And both sides do it. It's not, David against Goliath. Like everybody has lobbyists and they educate you. This is what it means for our company. We have employees in your district, employees in your state. We, source stuff from you. We have a grant to, the University of Iowa for cancer research. So you're like, okay, I'm going to pay attention. And they walk through how it impacts them. And then the other side comes in, the Little Sisters of the Poor, and says, like, screw them. And you put your analysis together and you bring it to the member. You sit with them or her, for 10 minutes. They talk to their colleagues and they vote. And it's a churn. And so you become dependent on information. And the lobbyists know that.
Yeah. I guess to me, it just seems like we're not getting like further research and everything. Like the University of Iowa, like, are they doing research on like human trials related to glyphosate? I have not seen that there's any randomized controlled trials about that. There's just all these people saying there's no evidence that it causes cancer. Well, there's not really studies, and that's why they say there's no evidence. But it's like, who's dictating what studies are done? It seems like it's the lobbyists. And then that doesn't seem like it's really representative. Like our government is not representative of us if the lobbyists are making all of the decisions and then just telling our representatives what to do.
So Diane, there's a couple issues at play here. And Dan's right. I mean, a lot of times it comes in and says, hey, Congressman, we've got a factory in your district and there's 500 jobs that depend on the manufacturing, the distribution of these things. And if you vote against it, those people are going to be out of work. And we just want to tell you. So it's not always just money. But the other issue that you're bringing up is the study funding. And that's less lobbyists and more industry, right? So the pharmaceutical company will say, let's go out and we're going to fund the University of Iowa to do a study on XYZ. And we're going to put these parameters on it. And then we got a study that says X is safe or not safe or whatever, right? Then they take that study, hand it to their lobbyists and say, hey, go meet with the congressman. Tell them that, we've done a study now and this and that. That's the bigger problem, but it's an industry issue, not necessarily a lobbying problem, meaning that you've got all of these medical schools in the realm that you're discussing of pharma and health and big food, where the industry is funding studies and putting parameters on the studies and then saying, look, this is safe, it's unsafe, this is smarter, better, or cheaper, or whatever. And then they use that as the means to go to their elected officials and say, wow, check out this thing that we just did. The universities buy into it because it's money for their their faculty. So, I mean, there's a much bigger problem at hand.
Yeah,
You know what?
it just,
Sorry.
go ahead.
No, please.
Diane, and then Dan.
even as it's just being explained to me, it seems so swampy. And
Oh, yeah.
I this week
Yes.
heard a glyphosate ad when I was in the car. I was like, what is it's January? Why are they what is going on here? And then it just hit me. I had like this very dark realization that it's not just contributing to the problem. It's like we should be electing representatives who go to Washington with our interests. And if they need information, they should be coming to the people, not waiting for lobbyists and corporations and people to come explain things from their perspective. So it's just,
Diane, that is why Donald Trump is so popular.
yeah, well, and
That's what he ran on.
but I'll tell you what, I never realized it. I've always listened. It's like Drain the Swamp, like all these things. It's like, oh yeah, we should do all that. But I'm having this realization that it's a lot worse. Like this movement, I think is kind of like a sleeper issue actually for Drain the Swamp. Like
Yeah.
100%, 100%.
And by the way, to kind of go to what you're saying, there is some data beginning to emerge that Americans don't like all these billionaires going into government. These like CEOs, I shouldn't say billionaires, these industry executives. And it goes to what you say, which is we as a people are inherently skeptical of power, of kind of business getting into government. And so to Democrats, like they see an opening there. And I think Trump is actually a little sensitive to some of it because it goes to what you're talking about.
I think they should be kind of careful with these the hearings tomorrow, and people have a lot of questions. And being called a conspiracy theorist, like that's very 2022. You know, we want the questions, and I just think that on both sides, Republicans and Democrats, they should be very cautious not to look like swamp creatures. You know, when they're questioning Bobby Kennedy. So
Yeah. Diane, thank you. Really appreciate
One of the
it.
things
Come back.
RFK said in apparently to Democrats is he's open to the idea of seizing drug patents from the big companies to distribute to genetics. And I imagine a few GOP senators are going to have questions about that.
Yeah. Diane, thank you. Come back regularly, please. Sean?
No, I was going to say, I mean, the one thing to Dan's first point is that some of these issues, I mean, there's issues like the red dye number 3, the ultra processed food, where I think the government has literally been covering up information. But there is another piece of this, which is that it's not always as black and white as some people would make certain issues out to be. And that's where, you know, I think what the big pharma issue about how much they charge in one country versus another, the role of PBMs, like there's a whole bigger discussion here. But I do think that to some extent, there is an argument that says if you want us to fund cancer research, and we don't think that we're going to be able to make our money back because you're going to hand it off to generics right away, we're not going to put $200 million into an unknown cure. And so there is this yin and yang of finding a balance that people want to make appropriate investments into things, certain diseases and things like that. That doesn't dissuade the investment. And so we've got to just figure out where that balance is.
I agree with you 100%.
Rather than going with the yin and yang, given our war against the Chinese, maybe Dr. Doolittle's push me, pull ya would be better.
Sure.
Jim Howard, can you tilt up a little bit? I want to see what's on the wall behind you. Is that possible? Look at that,
Ooh.
man.
Nice.
Did you
Tell
do
us
that
what-
yourself?
Jim Howard, tell us what that is, where that came from, please.
I'm in Montana. That's the last elk I shot. Yeah. So,
And what's the name of the company that does that for you? Not the shooting, but the mounting.
oh, just a buddy of mine.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Welcome to Montana.
Yeah.
Welcome, Jim Howard, one of the most beautiful states in America.
Absolutely.
Jim Howard, do you know what the largest building in Montana is?
Well, we've always said the one right across the street from my school is the one. It was the largest building without windows in the United States for a while.
What building is that?
It's the old planer building for the Bonner Mill that was the largest lumber mill in Montana back in the days when the railroads were being built in this area in the mining. Anyway,
And when you say your school, do you teach at a school?
I'm a superintendent, public school superintendent here in Montana.
Well, welcome and thank you for joining. What's on your mind today?
Well, and that's my area of interest is public education. And I would say, I think we're all well aware that the dialogue that came out of the Youngkin election and the conversations in Loudoun County certainly was one of the impetus for Trump's win. And I do think, and I'd love to have another conversation at a later date about when it's more relevant in terms of the Department of Ed. But I do think that what Trump does in the Department of Ed is going to have ramifications in the years ahead. And as a really passionate advocate for public education, but I'm fairly conservative as well. I just believe strongly that the Department of Ed, as it has operated for the last 30 or 40 years, is one of the largest problems in public education. It's what's causing the exodus of people, parents and families from public ed. It's what's causing and driving the teacher shortage in public ed. And a lot of us would think, oh, it's the woke stuff. It's not the woke stuff. It's the IDEA Act of 1975 just run amok because the regulations written by the bureaucrats for 50 years are just destroying public education. And I just really believe this. The thing I would love parents to know, and I'll get to a question, I'm sorry, but parents need to know.
Take your time. Huge topic.
Parents need to know. Our American parents need to know. If my kid does not have a disability, and that's 80 to 85% of America's students. If my child does not have a disability, my child has no right to a free and appropriate public education. The only people in the United States who are guaranteed FAPE, which is an acronym we use in education all the time, free and appropriate public education, are students with disabilities. So 85% of our American students do not have a federally protected right to an education. Parents don't know that. But they do know it because they vote with their feet and they leave the public schools and they say, those public schools are doing nothing about behaviors. They're doing nothing about kids can do this and that and nothing happens. And parents don't know that our hands are tied, just locked up by the regulations imposed by the Department of Ed through the OSEP, the Office of Special Education, and regulatory rules and dear colleague letters coming out of the Department of Ed. It's tying our hands. And again, I have parent after parent says, I love your school. I love your teachers. It's the best thing going, but I got to have my kid in a different classroom. So I'm going to the parochial school down the road.
Yeah.
So
Jim,
my question is,
yeah.
Can you just expand, like,
go ahead.
like, so when they say that, like, what's the why? That's what I'm trying to, I mean, I get the regulatory, but like, did they say because you're not doing this, or like, what is the why right there? How to finish that sentence? I need to take my kid out of your school because.
So, and it'd be interesting to have some more folks speak up, but if you're in public education over the last 10 years, what you've seen massively, every public school principal would tell you this, the behaviors are off the charts. The behaviors, especially post-COVID in primary grade kids. So it's not unusual at all for me to have a kindergarten kid pick up a desk and throw it at their peer and hit their, and you look horrified. This happens all the time in every school in the United States. And parents say, why the heck are you not doing something about that kid in my classroom? Because the federal law, because that kid gets labeled with a disability, a behavioral disability, federal law says we can only remove that kid from the classroom for 10 days total out of 180 days. We can only remove that kid from the classroom for 10 days total. That's the federal regulation. And so I have 10 days with that kid. So guess what I do 9 days out of 10 with that classroom? That kid's throwing desks, and the rest of the 19 kids in that classroom, they go have math in the hallway that day, or they have reading on the stage or in the gymnasium that day, because that kid has all the rights in the world as imposed by the Department of Education. That special education is destroying American public schools. And it's not because it's not a well-meaning, I mean, who doesn't want to protect kids and with disabilities and provide them as rich and as encompassing educational experience as possible? But the regulatory regime has run amok, and it has to change. And I'm desperate for Steve Daines and Sheehy and.
Well, I'll tell you what. You know what? Talk about good timing, this. Jim. Steve Daines is on my show tonight. I am going to tell him that we talked.
Well, he and I are friends. I mean, he knows me. You can mention my name. He'll know me right away. I talk, but it's the time is ripe for especially rural school state or congressional leaders to say it's time to fix this.
Okay.
Okay, Jim.
The
Jim,
Department
here's
of
what I
Ed
want-
has to
here's-
change.
Here's what I want to do, because we all want to talk about this at length, and it's almost 10 Eastern. Do you know how to use the chat function in
Yeah,
Zoom?
yeah,
Go on there and find Lori Blackford. Okay? And,
yeah.
and send her, you see Lori in there? Send her your,
Is she one of the two-way people or just straight name? Just find her name. Yeah, I'll find her.
find her name.
Okay.
Find her name. Well, do it now because we're going to end and you won't be able to do it then. And just put in LAUR and you'll see Lori.
Okay.
And text her either your phone number or message her your phone number or your email address.
It's not coming
We're
up.
gonna-
I am in the chat. I'm sorry.
All right, hold on.
I'll email Dan. He and I have emailed a little bit. I'll
Oh,
email
okay.
Dan.
All right. Email Dan. That's good.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. So what I want to do is I want to get your suggestions for other folks to book, and let's do a whole show on this, either on this program or on the evening program or a special episode, because we all going to educate ourselves more about this, and we want you to be able to ask folks questions. Hopefully, we'll get somebody who doesn't feel exactly the same way you do, and we'll do a whole hour on it. Okay.
Thanks so much.
Okay. Thank you for
Love
joining.
your
and
show.
for
Tell
and for-
everybody about
thank
it. So yeah.
All right, thank you for that. And again, if it weren't 10:01, I'd launch right in, but we could, none of the three of us could do it justice, and we're super eager to explore it in full. So thank you, appreciate it.
See
The
ya.
answer, as someone put in the chat, is the Montage is the largest building in your state. At least they claim
Okay.
it is. Not sure they're right, but they claim it is. Thank you, sir. All right, tomorrow on this program, we'll be back at 9 o'clock. Maybe we'll talk education. Congressman Mike Lawler of New York, fresh off the conference meeting in Florida, will join us here. Tonight I'll be back at 6 on Two Way Tonight, so we'll see you then. And we'll tell you tonight about a show coming up on Friday, special show at 11:30 Eastern Time, a.m. Eastern Time on Friday on Greenland. We're going to talk about whether the United States should acquire Greenland or not, what the pros and cons as the American people see it are. We'll have a new poll analyzing public opinion, and we'll have a big discussion about it. So if you're interested in that topic, please mark 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time on your calendar for this Friday. And again, we'll tell you more about that tonight on Two Way Tonight. Gentlemen, closing words.
Excited.
Excited. Dan.
Only Tuesday.
All right. Also tonight, we'll have full coverage of Caroline Leavitt's first press conference, in which she will be channeling the musical stylings of Sean Spicer, if nothing else. All right. So we'll see. I'll see you at 6. The three of us will see you tomorrow at 9. Thanks, everybody who had questions, and everybody for joining, and have a great day.